Welcome. And as I've been doing with these spiritual discipline series is I just want to give an opportunity to talk through some different practices and different ways of being able to think about how we can consider ways we can grow closer to God, but also it's developing routines and habits that help shape our identity and shape our calling. Because I think a lot of good spiritual disciplines give us insight into who we're called to be. So I was trying to think of which ones I wanted to do this time, and I decided upon simplicity and gratitude because I think that they actually connect to a lot of other spiritual disciplines. And so if people have a bit of a base reflection on simplicity in their life or a base reflection on gratitude, it actually connects with a lot of other prayer practices and a lot of other different ways of considering this. So what I've done is I've put together a handout, or I've got a couple of them, and I will send them to you afterwards so you can have them. But I'm going to screen share and put the handout information up in front of you. So, and there's a couple of different things, so I'll be jumping between a few different items. All right. I just put this on a different view mode. All right, so simplicity. This definition of simplicity comes from a book by Adele Calhoun on spiritual disciplines, and it's a book I highly recommend. It's got a lot of good practices and ideas, and some of them are coming directly from that. But her definition of simplicity is: simplicity cultivates the art of letting go. Simplicity aims at loosening inordinate attachment to owning and having. Simplicity brings freedom, and with it, generosity. And I wanted to consider first three different scripture verses. I'm going to pull those up. So the first one is one from Matthew 6, 19 to 34, and there's a number of pieces in it. But do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume, where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And I think that's an important phrase, especially in our Western culture. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. In a culture where we love our things, if we are pursuing things and we're pursuing a life where we're financially stable, that's probably where our heart will also end up being. The eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light, but if your eye is unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to the span of your life? And why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? Therefore, do not worry, saying, what will we eat, or what will we drink, or what will we wear? For it is the Gentiles who strive for all these things, and indeed your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But first, strive first for the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today. And it's a passage that's often done in the context of worry, but there is at the heart of this, from a spiritual discipline aspect, in the whole section of that part of the Sermon on the Mount, that Jesus is very much getting at cultivating an attitude of simplicity in your life, one day at a time, just enough for today, and keep it at that. The second passage that I would want to read in thinking about simplicity is Mark 10, 17 to 21. The rich man. As he was setting out on a journey, a man ran up and knelt before him and asked him, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. You know the commandments. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not defraud. Honor your father and mother." He said to him, "Teacher, I have kept all these since my youth." Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said, "You lack one thing. Sell what you own, give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." When he heard this, he was shocked and went away grieving, for he had many possessions. You can hear that in this passage, that a person can be an exceedingly moral individual. You can live a very so-called godly life and even have all the right thinking. So you can know your church's doctrine inside out and backwards, and feel good about what you know and even what you're keeping. But the reality is where is your heart? Just like Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. Here, Jesus looks straight to the heart of this individual. And it's not that having money is necessarily a bad thing, but if it owns you, if it's something you can't let go, then there's probably a problem, and it's a problem that needs to be examined. The third passage, and this is going to come up as well when we talk about gratitude, is Philippians 4, 10 to 14. "I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at last you have revived your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned for me, but had no opportunity to show it. Not that I am referring to being in need, for I have learned to be content with whatever I have. I know what it is to have little, and I know what it is to have plenty. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being well fed and of going hungry, of having plenty and of being in need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. In any case, it was kind of you to share my distress." I find this passage interesting because many people love to quote the "I can do all things through him who strengthens me" as their favorite Bible verse. Having been in different contexts where people give their favorite verse coming out of Sunday school, and a number of people will quote this verse, but it's in the context of being satisfied with whatever your circumstances are, and that includes circumstances of not having too much and having very little. We should be content. So those are just three passages that I think help us begin to think about what it means to live simply. I mean, there's a host of other passages throughout Scripture we could get into, but those are just three that I think begin to get us thinking about simplicity from a biblical standpoint. Now, there's some reflection questions that I think are worth discussing. So the first one, in what ways are you susceptible to the entitlement mentality of our age? And I think this is a good question for us to be asking even daily. In what ways are you susceptible to the entitlement mentality of our age? We do live in an age where people have this sense of, well, no, I should have a good wage, and I should have this, that, or whatever. I mean, sometimes I even hear that in the demands of the student union when they say we should have free education. Education should be free for all. I'm not against those types of things, but you have to hear the entitlement in it as well. Life is a gift, and it's about grace. And in some respects, we need to hold all things lightly. The second question, how has the more is better mentality shaped you? I often think about when Brenda and I were first married, we had these end tables in our living room that were these wooden boxes. We actually still have them. We still use them as tables and end tables around our house because it fits the way we think. But we had a visit from a church elder who was coming to see how we were doing and check in on us. And I remember him looking at our old wooden box end tables, and he says, I remember when we were first married and our furniture was simple things like boxes like that too. And there was a little piece of us that was offended because we liked our boxes. We thought they were great. And here this person was saying, oh yeah, you have essentially saying you guys are cute. You're using these old boxes for furniture. But this is what happens, and I can recognize it even in our life today, that at times we have upgraded. We have bought into a bit of I can get to the next stage, and if I get this, then I can get the next thing. And I see it with my kids in electronics. If I have this is okay, but now I see the next thing and I want to upgrade and get the next thing. And it's an insidious, I would even say sinful component of life that easily gets us focused on the wrong thing. Third question, do you envy those who have more things or more opportunities than you? How much of your identity is wrapped up in what you own and where you go? Who are you without all of these acquisitions and opportunities? The fifth question, what is it like for you to give away things you still want and like? Which I think is an intriguing question. We have this sense that we are to collect things, but just like Jesus with the rich young ruler, to what extent would we be ready to give it away regardless of whether it's still something we even think we need? Is it still good how important is it that we're ready to give it to somebody else? And 6, one of you downsized, and what was it like for you? And I'm curious with that last question, and I'd love for you guys to unmute and answer that last one. Have you guys downsized at all at this point in your life yet?
I'll share. When I moved from high school to university, we moved houses, and so I had to pack everything into just like 2 or 3 suitcases, and so it made me realize how collecting physical possessions is more difficult in the long run, and so it gave me a new perspective of not trying to collect physical objects, because there's only so much. If you're asked to ever leave some place with just 1 or 2 suitcases, you're gonna have things, and that pain is so great that like you don't want to experience that again. So it's better to stop collecting physical things as movable items.
Anyone else have a downsize experience?
I don't have one, but it's coming on the horizon. Because if classes are not in person next year, I'll have to do it for this coming May. I'll have to just take most of my furniture and give all of that away, and I will have to, regardless wherever I'm going after university, I have to kind of get rid of a lot of this, depending on where I'm headed, if I'm living in my own house or not. So it's coming. I just have to mentally prepare myself to throw away like most of my furniture, etc.
I guess part of me is curious. For many of you, maybe you moved out of your parents' house when you headed off to university. Did you have a sense of loss when you first moved out of the house based on what was in your parents' house to your living situation starting at university? Do you remember that experience? Do you have any experiences of, oh man, I really missed A, B, C, D, or E when you did that?
Does it count? Does a dog count?
Could.
Actually, I remember actually kind of nice and kind of freeing to not have that much stuff. Like to be able to open my little drawer in my residence room and know that like everything in there was something useful and I didn't have things or worry about these piles of random stuff that were that are still in my my bedroom.
Yeah, I had the interesting experience of my mother moving last month, and over the course of August and September, it struck me how often she was calling, wondering if I wanted certain items because she wasn't going to need them anymore. And I remember thinking, these are things that I have never had and I've never needed for 40 years. Why would I need it now? And if you don't need it, then why would I need it? And there was so many items like that. And I just kept saying, if I don't know what I'm missing, then don't tell me about it. Just get rid of it. Because we have this sense of when somebody says, "Ooh, you can have this," ooh, and then we think we want it. I think that we'll talk a little bit about this now, because the first practice of simplicity, I would say, is to declutter. I would say even now, even in your spaces, there are things that you could probably get rid of. What does it look like to pray and then go through your room and ask, do I need this? Will I need this? What does this, whatever this may be, mean to the flourishing of who I am? Could someone else benefit from this? I think there's sometimes, I think about that with clothing, that we probably all have far too much clothing. What does it look like to give it away because somebody else could use it? Not because you don't like it, but this could benefit somebody else more than me right now. And as people of rituals, I think that this is a practice that everybody needs to develop regularly. I've even encouraged people to set a certain time within their calendar every year. People talk about spring cleaning, but spring cleaning isn't just something you need to do for the sake of, oh, it's good to clean. I think decluttering and continually taking the time to pay attention to what I have is a really important ritual that keeps us focused on the main things, as opposed to getting caught up in the bigger, better, I need more mentality. And it's hard. And I confess that it's hard for me as well. I'm not always good at this. And I often joke living with an artist who has a lot of different things that are of inspiration, that it is easy to have a lot of pieces that are artistic, but it also adds to a certain amount of clutter. But there's a very, very healthy thing to always purge. And I know that's one thing that Brenda is actually really good at, despite the fact that we have a lot of different little things that are part of the artistic decor of our household. I also know that she purges very regularly, that there is this sense in which she might collect things from anything from a dumpster to a thrift store at times, but boxes will go out regularly. If it's not being used, if it hasn't served any purpose, it goes, and it goes to an organization that can make some money off of it, or a not-for-profit. And I think that type of purging is really important. So that's the first practice. Any questions about decluttering? The second would be limit your choices. We have this aspect of Western society, and I think particularly in North America, that we think choice is the ultimate reality that we live in. The more choices, the better. And the more freedom we have, the better. But I think that is a problem of our culture, in that it actually, part of the mental health challenge these days is we have too many choices. And we have far too many aspects in which we think that we need to do this, we do that, even choices when it comes to careers and callings. There was a day and an age where if you grew up in a small town, and unless you were of the highest level, that you might go in further in education, but otherwise your choices were limited to working on the farm or working in a local store. You didn't have many career or vocation options. And therefore you took what you could get, and that was it. But there was simplicity in that. Instead of always feeling like you had to make the right choice or feeling like you had to get somewhere, that limited choice was freeing. And from a spiritual standpoint, I think there's this deep freedom that comes with limited choices. And so to develop that mindset and that attitude in our lives, we need to think about the ways that we might limit our choices for the sake of the goodness of our hearts and our souls and our mental health. So how can you limit your choices as a way of simplifying? The first one I would say is groceries. I actually encourage grocery shopping in smaller stores. And sometimes that means they cost a little more. It sometimes maybe isn't convenient because you can't quite get that exact brand that you're always used to. But going to a store where you basically have one choice of sugar and more limited amounts of things is freeing. And I'm not talking about you need to go down to the corner store and limit it to that, because we want to make healthy food choices and things like that. But I at one point had a Costco membership and I hated it. I bought things that I didn't need, things that would appear to be on sale. You would get because it felt like you were getting a good deal and you would use this all up eventually. But the amount that is available, I don't think it's healthy. I think it feeds something insidious inside of us. Just because it's a good deal and just because you can get it in bulk doesn't mean it's necessarily a benefit to you. But even when it comes to grocery stores, 2 years ago when we moved out to the country and into our place here, we started shopping in Richmond, which has a much smaller independent, much smaller than the Loblaws that we used to shop at when we were in Ottawa. And I love it. I love it for the fact that it is much smaller. You go through the store much quicker. You don't think about these myriad of options that you could possibly get. And no, maybe I can't get this very unique style of food that comes from Greece. But I don't need it. I can get by with what's available there. And I guess the simplicity even of what I've noticed in terms of relationships and people who work there, when there's a smaller place, you see the same people over and over again. And there's a simplicity about that that's really good. I think when it comes to entertainment, this is also true. There's a song that I love by Bruce Springsteen that he wrote back in 1992 that is called 57 Channels and Nothing On. And he wrote it with that aspect of cable television at that point in time, where suddenly people were exploding with more television options, and yet what they were doing is flipping through TV, looking for one more thing or looking for something a little bit better or a little bit more interesting. And it becomes this endless pursuit of something a little bit better. I think when it comes to entertainment, this is another area that we can simplify. I think there's benefit to getting rid of Netflix and not taking on subscription TV services. I think it's, if you're going to have a type of entertainment, keep it to something where you're limited to a number of things, and that's it. And I've gone back and forth with this one as well. I've gone years without Netflix, and then we've got it for a while again. And usually what happens is at a certain point you go, I need to get rid of this. It's a time waster. There's better things I could be doing with my time, but it's also, you begin to consume. And when you consume your entertainment, it probably means you're developing a consumption mindset elsewhere in your life as well. I'd love to hear your suggestions of other areas within your life that you could limit your choices. Anybody else have thoughts on ways that we could limit our choices? Right.
Social gatherings, like not trying to go to this or bunch of different churches, just focusing on like one group or one church. Speaking from personal experience, that has like been a lot less stressful than trying to keep up with several different groups at the same time.
Well, I think you cover off on two things there, Drew. I think you're right. I think that's true from a social standpoint. If our circles are so large and we're constantly fluttering between different groups of people, how well are we actually investing in the people in our lives? Or are we simply looking for more entertainment by trying to find other friends that we can hang out with? Relationships take work. And if you're truly going to have people that are invested in you, you need to invest in them. You know, you give before you receive on some level. And I think that's a really important component of our lives. And I think that's a problem when you then put it towards church. I think that's a problem with the mentality we have to church shopping. I'm not a big fan of large churches. It's too many people. You can get into a perfect niche of people that are exactly like you. You can easily, in a large church, find the 15 people that suit you best. And it doesn't challenge you or even challenge your assumptions at times. I think it's important to be in spaces where we experience the other and experience people that are different than we are. But when it comes to the communities we're in, if we're serving in a small church or being a part of a small community in a neighborhood, it's much easier to actually care for the neighborhood and invest in the people around you because you're doing it together. Whereas if you're a part of a congregation of people who all drive 30, 40 kilometers from different directions, it's much tougher to really love and invest in your neighborhood and in the people around you. So Drew, what you're leading into is number 3 that I have on the sheet is what complicates your life with God? What practices are bringing life? What ways there's spiritual clutter? I think you're absolutely right. Being involved in too many Christian things sounds good, but it isn't necessarily good. It's just clutter. It's almost keeping us busy and at times preventing us from investing in other components of our life that God might be calling us to invest in from a balance standpoint. I also think there are sometimes parts of being even in a community where we try to do too much, and that needs to be simplified. I'm curious with this COVID crisis, if there will be benefits to churches having to declutter themselves. What's the most important things? What are the things that we need to really maintain? Where's the most important parts of our community? What can we push aside, and how do we be better for it? Because it's easy to say we've got 21 programs and there's something here for everybody. That's not necessarily healthy. That just leads to a type of Christian consumerism. So any questions about either of those, about thoughts about ways of having less choices or about decluttering even a spiritual life?
Can I ask a question just about simplicity in general?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, because when I definitely see the importance of it, and like I believe that we're called, it's like part of idolatry. Like we're called to not have anything above God, and we should be prepared to give it like any up, like at any time really. And I'm wondering because I think about that, and I try to make sure that like my mindset's in a place where I could give anything up if I needed to. But do you think the practices themselves of like decluttering and actually giving stuff up are necessary, or do you think it's okay to just that mind? You think by not doing the practices, your mind just kind of convincing yourself that you would do it if you had to, but as a way of avoiding actually like giving things? So, yeah, do you think the practices are necessary to have in mindset?
I don't think that the practices themselves, they're like, well, these are things that you must do to simplify your life. Like this practice is a must and this one isn't. But if there are no if you're not intentional about simplicity in your life, your life will be cluttered with all kinds of things very, very quickly. You'll wake up at age 50 and discover that, man, my life is complicated on so many levels. And anyone who has decluttered and simplified their life will tell you that it is freeing. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but I don't think that God has wired us in such a way that we're supposed to be married to the things of this world in that kind of way. But I don't think there's a hard and fast rule like, oh, you got to practice this thing of simplicity. But it's easy to say, oh, I would be ready to give it away. But if you never practice actually doing it, that question always remains. The question would be, is it actually still getting in the way and you just don't realize it?
Right.
I don't know if that answers your question or not, but there's no legalism to spiritual disciplines for the most part.
Looks like Aiden has a...
Yeah, go for it, Aiden.
I mean, this kind of follows up with what he was saying, but do you think we should be in the habit, or because we do Lent and we give up chocolate or something that we might see as an impediment to God, as our kind of reenactment of the 40 days in the desert? Should we be doing fasts of things that we maybe like doing, like watching TV shows, if we're seeing that's getting too important or something? Should we go on a purposeful and a slightly longer than we might want to fast from these things? Is that something we should?
Yeah, so that's why when I said we started, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about simplicity is because I think a lot of other spiritual disciplines actually jump off of it, fasting definitely being one of them. I don't want to spend too much time talking about financial and giving and tithing as a spiritual discipline, but it is also connected to this. So yes, I do think that there is an aspect to fasting or giving things up, and sometimes giving it up for a long time because you realize how much of a hold it has on your life. It's a really important thing to do. Like when you bring up the fasting one, I always find it curious that there's no hard and fast rule in Scripture of fasting. But Jesus does say in Matthew chapter 6, when you fast, he just assumes it. He assumes that a good practicing Jewish person is fasting. So it just leads me to the question, why wouldn't we? If our Christian faith is built off of the Jewish faith, and Jesus is saying, when you fast, don't be like the Pharisees. Don't do it for the sake of trying to, hey, look at me, people, I'm so much spiritually higher than you are. But when you fast, just do it. Do it privately. Do it in a way that is helping to shape your heart. And absolutely, fasting is just so tied to these things. Anything else? So I do hope to talk a little bit more about some specifics of fasting down the road. Simplifying commitments, number 4. So I think this one is interesting. This one also comes from Adele Calhoun. And she has 3 things. Practice giving no excuses, no apologies, no spontaneous yeses. And she writes, when you're tempted to say yes, stop yourself and say, let me think about this for a moment. I'll call you back in 10 minutes. Even 10 minutes can afford you the time to consider whether you really want to say yes. That's interesting to me because I see within Christian circles and some people's character that They want to give, and it's awesome. But when you say yes to too many things, you're not doing a favor to anybody. You're not able to invest in certain things as well as you could because you're being spread thin to this, to this, to this, and to this, and giving little pieces, and it's all good, but it isn't necessarily the best in terms of what you could be investing into some things. So I think that habit and practice of saying, let me think about it, and actually pausing, be careful in not simply saying yes immediately to requests for your time or for your participation in something is a very good thing. With a clear, let me get back to you by tomorrow or by then to let you know. I mean, obviously circumstances dictate what it is, but the second one then is when you're tempted to apologize for something like a messy house, don't. An apology can give the impression that your house is always neat and clean. Perhaps people need to see that you live with a certain amount of clutter and that it's okay. You know, like a simple part of life is that we shouldn't feel sorry for how we're living. And if we are feeling sorry for how we're living, then there is a question to be asked about whether we need to change how we're living. So making excuses is often a spiritual sign of possibly something that actually needs to change. But at times, making excuses is also a time in which we have to stop and invest and in simplicity say, well, this is who I am. These are the things that I need to embrace about myself, instead of always thinking about the next thing or about something else that you think you should be or should have or whatever it may be. And then the third one that she brings up is when you want to make an excuse for something like being late or eating on the run, let the excuse go. Accept yourself and the reality of life. Take ownership of your situation. It's very simple. And this is a really important principle. The simple things we should own in terms of instead of making excuses for our situation, if we own it, then we're able to embrace who we are, which I think is a really important component. Again, if we feel like we're making excuses and we're embarrassed about the fact that we're always late for something or we're not following through on commitments we've made, that probably should be a time for us to pause and stop and think about how can I simplify something here so I don't have to be making an excuse for myself. So no excuses, no apologies, and no spontaneous yeses can actually be a step in discerning what you truly need to apologize for. Questions about that?
How does this fall under simplicity?
Yeah, I've always pondered this as well, but I think it falls under simplicity in the larger picture of who we're trying to be for the sake of everybody else. Like at times, we seem to be trying to create a lifestyle and we're trying to create a portrait of who we are that is satisfactory for everybody else. If you think about the Facebook and Instagram world, and Twitter and TikTok and whatever else have you, there's a piece of it that is always image crafting. And I think that this, from an aspect of simplicity, is important because we need to get back to the raw, vulnerable reality of who we are. And vulnerability is really also about simplicity. And so when I think about these attitudes in terms of no excuses and apologies and those types of things, and how are we managing our time, I think there is an aspect of how this fits with simplicity. It falls under other lines too. That's, like I say, with spiritual disciplines, it crosses lines, but it's about being the simple, authentic self, who God calls us to be without trying to be something more. Does that answer for you?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with these ideas. It's
Yeah.
just that when you frame it this way, people who will do things so that they're like consistent with who they want to be. And yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I like it. I'm glad you're sharing.
I think this part of the simplicity, it falls into other parts of character as well. So you could easily, like I say, it falls into other disciplines, but it also falls into just good character. The fifth one that I have is giving, which I think is a huge shaper of who we are, our ability to give and give away. But I'm going to leave that because I think I want to wrap that into talking a bit about finances and what it means to manage finances well in our lives. And so I'm going to do one session on spiritual discipline regarding finances, period, and talk about everything from tithing to budgeting to thinking about a number of different aspects of how we handle our money. I think that's a good one session topic. I think it's an important part of simplicity as well. All right, I want to move on to gratitude. And I could easily do a whole separate session on this, but recognizing that I've only got so many sessions to do, I wanted to tie this in because I think this adds some more disciplines that help with simplicity. So the first definition there of gratitude, affirming, is more of a textbook kind of definition, affirming goodness in one's life, recognizing that the sources of this goodness lie at least partially outside the self. And again, the second one comes from Calhoun. Thanksgiving is possible not because everything goes perfectly, but because God is present. The Spirit of God is within us, nearer to us than our own breath. It is a discipline to choose to stitch our days together with a thread of gratitude. But the decision to do so is guaranteed to stitch us closer to God. Attend to the truth that, bidden or unbidden, God is present. I find it very interesting that people who deal with addictions, that one of the aspects of discipline that they need to develop in their life almost right away is gratitude. Because humans seem to very easily get into this woe is me attitude in our lives. And we think of ourselves as the victim. And we want to find blame, and we want to place the blame everywhere except in ourselves. And one of the ways in which we begin
You're muted.
Yeah. One of the ways we get outside of ourselves is to not focus on what we don't have or what's gone wrong, but rather focus on what is and what we've been given. So I'm going to pull up a couple of Bible passages. Wrong one. Now you could use any Psalms in there, put any Psalms. I mean, this is why, again, from a spiritual discipline, I'm constantly encouraging people read the Psalms and make them a regular habit. Read one Psalm daily, work your way through the Psalms, and then do it again and do it again and do it again. Reading the Psalms help develop a lot of emotional components, but one of the themes you notice in the Psalms is gratitude. It comes over and over. And so a simple one like Psalm 100, make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. Know that the Lord is God. It is he that made us. We are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him. Bless his name, for the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. It's one of many examples. Luke 17, 11 and 19. Jesus cleanses 10 lepers. There's lots going on in this, so I can't exegete the whole thing, but on the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priest." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God, except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." Now, part of the challenge in this is that the one who comes back is the foreigner, the outsider, the person that isn't necessarily respected. I mean, it's meant to poke at who sees the reality of the kingdom. And that often people on the inside, people who are part of the family of God, lose sight of this. And I think this passage is a powerful passage regarding gratitude in the life of Christian faith. Because again, it reminds us that faith and religion and all of the moral practices we have, we might think we're living very righteously. All of these other 9 went to the temple. They followed the rules that once you're clean, you had to go to the temple. You had to show yourself to be clean before you could enter into everyday life. They all knew the rules, and they're more than willing to follow them at this point. But only one of them came back and thanked Jesus. Only one of them had that deeper sense to say, wait a second, first and foremost, it isn't that I simply need to show myself to be clean so that I can regain my status in life. First and foremost, I need to be thankful for this gift I've received, which is a gift of renewal and a gift of life. And then Philippians 4, verses 4 through 9. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Jesus Christ. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, and if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And I think that's really important. If there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. Jesus seems to place, or Paul seems to place this emphasis that in Christ, we need to find focus on the things that we're to be thankful for. So, practices of gratitude. 1, this ties back to why we pray. Prayer is, first of all, a point of gratitude. It's not a point of asking God for more things. That's often what it turns into, and often when you hear people getting together to say, hey, we should pray more together, they're always praying more about getting things or changing things. But I think prayer is, first of all, a practice of giving thanks. And for those of you who were in our prayer session the first time, we did the prayer of the examen, which is a daily exercise of reflecting on everything in your day and reflecting on everything that happened so that you pay better attention to what happened today that I missed that I should be thankful for. But in simplicity, I think if I had to encourage people to start developing one small habit, it would be in the morning, before you start anything else in your day, start with saying, what's one thing that I'm thankful for about this coming day? And it might be, I get to go to class. I get to learn. That's a privilege. It may not be what you want to do that day, and there might be other things you'd rather do, but you're still thankful for the opportunity to do it. What's one thing that you're thankful for about this coming day, so that you have this sense of entering into the day with the anticipation of this is something to be thankful for. And then at the end of the day, to acknowledge at least one thing every day, to stop before you go to sleep, ponder at least one thing that you are thankful for from that day. I guarantee that people who practice something as simple as this, taking time out at least twice a day to be thankful for things that went on that day, are happier people. Guarantee it. because you begin to look for what is instead of what isn't. The second practice, for some people, this doesn't work for everybody, is a gratitude journal. And I mean, if you keep a prayer journal, the two basically go hand in hand. If you're writing down things that you're praying for and paying attention and giving thanks and writing them in a journal so that you can reflect on them. But as a tangible way of being thankful, write it down. Have a book beside your bed so that at the end of the day, you write some things down that you're thankful for. And maybe once a week, just take stock of all the things you wrote down that week. And you keep going with this to the point where you have a huge collection and you just start to realize, man, these journals are filling up. Because generally speaking, we have lots of things to be thankful for. The third one, and I think this one is far more crucially important than we probably realize, and that is to be intentional about how we thank people, how we give thanks to people for the way that they have invested in our lives, or just paying attention to something about a person that we're thankful for. And so I think it's an important habit to develop, to write a note, email, or cards that thank people for something each week. I think if you take time out every week at some point in your week to say, okay, this is the half hour that I am going to write my thank you notes. And if you're a part of a church community, maybe you have a mailbox, you can put them in, or mailing actual cards to people means a ton. But even pausing just to send an email to say thank you to this person for something they do. You can send an email to an organization to thank them for their work. That stuff matters. But it matters not just because you're appreciating the people around you, but because you're cultivating something within yourself as well. That, again, is outwardly looking instead of focusing on yourself. Excuse me. All right. Number 4, consider the music you listen to and how it orients you towards your day. I think music, or the arts in general, I mean, I'm using music, but you could probably use other forms too. You know, what do you have hanging on your wall? How are you decorating your spaces? What are you listening to? Those practical realities also orient your day and get you thinking about these things. If you're listening to music that is only angsty and angry, you will lean into being angsty and angry. And while there's room for some of that, if that's all you're listening to, it is going to shape you. And so if we're looking to cultivate gratitude in our life and a sense of thanksgiving, we need to make sure that we are also listening and looking at things that remind us to be thankful. I mean, one of the important things about having pictures of family around us is not just so that we can nostalgically, fondly remember them. It's so that we can be thankful that we have people that we are connected to. So that's a visual that we want to have around. But I think it works the same with our ears. What are we listening to can also very much shape our attitude of thankfulness. And then the last one that I'll say, I mean, this is not an exhaustive list. I'm just giving 5 ways to help develop gratitude. And that is volunteer for something each week that specifically doesn't benefit you. I mean, I know some people who I've run into over the years, and I see this even in the university, they put in a lot of volunteer time, but they're also padding their resume. Sometimes I see people in church, they volunteer for a lot of things, but it's because they have this sense of how they want their kids to be shaped, and they have a sense of how they want their church to succeed. These are good things, nothing wrong with them. But how are you volunteering or giving your time in a way that it isn't about you at all? Because when you do that, it shows that you're investing in life, and it's not just about you. It's you're giving back, and this goes back to the giving thing, which I'll talk about more another time, but it will cultivate gratitude in you if you take the time to volunteer for something each week that doesn't personally benefit you. You will be personally benefited by doing it, but don't set out for the purpose of it benefiting you. Any questions about habits of gratitude? Or other ideas that you want to share? Okay. That is what I have for tonight. We're at 7:30 and I want to try and keep this to an hour. So unless you have something you want to throw in, any questions about simplicity and final questions or thoughts about simplicity or gratitude?
How advanced are you in your plan to completely negate your wardrobe down to a blue shirt and some pants?
Haven't got there yet, Aiden. I haven't bought much for clothes in quite a while. There's aspects of my wardrobe that get smaller all the time. So Aiden's referring to a conversation that I had last year based on a story that I'd heard of people who are, they're turning their wardrobe into one clothing item. So they decide what their look is going to be. And if I think about one person I know who practices this, he only wears black shirts and black pants. And so whether it's a t-shirt or a dress shirt, or and it's generally black jeans, that's all he wears, no matter whether he's at church, whether he's at work, whatever the case may be. People don't notice his clothing. They just know that, oh yeah, he always wears black. And it's kind of become his uniform. But for him, it also makes it really simple in terms of simplicity, that when he goes shopping, he just doesn't really need to do it other than finding something else black because it's worn out. And he's not wasting a lot of time longing to try and cultivate a certain look around themselves. So I'd said to Aiden that I think that if I do that, it's going to end up being a blue dress shirt and a pair of khaki pants or something along those lines. And if I get 2 pairs of pants and 3 shirts, I should be good. But I haven't pulled it off yet. Things to work towards. That's why I think in the priesthood, there's a real advantage to wearing a robe. I think there's some real benefits to that from a ministry standpoint. You don't get caught up in any of the consumer qualities of life. Although I do joke with Father Anthony that his bling is much nicer than mine.
What about if people like having different clothes for like creativity purposes or artistic reasons? Like if it's something that brings them joy for the art and creativity.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are no hard and fast rules about these things. So I have no problem with that. And I think it's fun. I think people can be as creative as they want to be. However, when you see a house show and they're renovating the house and they're taking out a bedroom so that they can turn the room into a walk-in closet. Think about that for a second. An entire bedroom so that you have enough room to keep all your shoes and all your clothes and all of those types of things. There's something disgusting about that. If we put ourselves in the context of the world, I think, and who God calls us to be. Sorry if any of you who have very large walk-in closets and I've just offended you.
No, I mean, that's like, it's very true. Like some people have so much space just for their clothes and there's still people on the streets because there's no space for them to have a home, you know? Mm-hmm. It's like that perspective is sick, kind of.
Yep.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So, I was just wondering how, like, there's this idea of like Sunday best, like dressing up to look really nice when you go to church. Is that kind of like a society ideal, or is that a way we can like respect God?
I think you can go either way on that one. You can make an argument either way. I mean, I grew up in a culture and a time where you had your Sunday clothes and you wore them very specifically. And there's a theology behind that which says if the church is the bride of Christ, then you dress like you're attending a wedding feast every Sunday, because church on Sunday is like the place of our marriage vows week after week after week. So there is something to be said about dressing up. That can be a very beautiful thing, but it is so cultural. What's best in one place is very different that's best in the next place. You can have somebody who's got a pair of very expensive jeans and t-shirt, and that best might actually be much more valuable than a suit and a tie. So you can make the argument that the person that's wearing the t-shirt and the jeans is actually wearing something that's more valuable. I think it's about the heart. What's your attitude behind it? If you're dressing up for church so that you can keep up with the church Joneses, don't want to be at church and somebody else and not have the proper clothing like everybody else. I don't want somebody else looking at me because I'm not wearing a tie. Then that's about you. You're making, if we go to the excuses comment, you're trying to image craft, and I think that can happen at church as much as it can happen on Facebook. But if you also have an attitude where it doesn't matter what I wear, and you show up in clothing that in some respects doesn't fit, like and it's hard for me to say what that is, but if you don't care, if you're cultivating an attitude like who cares what I look like or what I say, yeah, God doesn't care what you look like what you say. But if the attitude of your heart is that that you're coming before God in almost a carelessness sort of attitude, I don't know if that's the best either. So it's not a clear answer, but I think it's something that people should wrestle with in a good way. And they can land in a lot of different spots.
Isn't the danger in sharing about these practices just in part people doing them and trying to do them right rather than see the goodness or like the value in doing them for themselves? Because if we're obsessed with form or doing different practices for the sake of doing those practices, we don't get anywhere.
Yep.
And in the same way, like, I think I can understand why someone would want to wear simpler clothes to live more simply and go against the culture that says we need to have more things or we need to look a certain way. And we are most respectful when we look a certain way.
Yeah. I mean, any spiritual discipline can turn into a type of legalism that is very ungodly. I just think that I think they're just good. These should be things that we're wrestling with, and that doing these disciplines is always supposed to be cultivating and reflecting upon what it means to be in relationship with God and His world and with one another. It shouldn't be done just for the sake of doing it. That being said, sometimes we do develop habits because we know that it will shape us in the long run, even in those moments where sometimes we're participating when we don't feel like it, because we're also pushing against a selfish approach to life where we only do the things we want to do. So it's a balance there.
You're talking about volunteering for things that don't personally benefit you. When I think of like acts of volunteering, I feel like I can always, if you go deep enough, you can always find a way that it personally benefits you. And sometimes I find it hard to rid myself of thinking in that way, rid myself of those thoughts, you know. And I was wondering if you had any tips on that, or is it even possible to completely do it like a purely selfless act as a human, you know?
Yeah, there's actually some big ongoing theological debates about that throughout history, in whether or not the Christian can even fully live for God without some incentive. And so there's this aspect of heaven or hell that becomes kind of both the carrot and the stick. And can the human actually live without having some kind of carrot in front of them? And I think it's just a good debate to have and to live into it. But it's pretty tough to find people that are completely altruistic in everything they do. And I think it's okay. I think it's fine for us to know that there are certain things we're doing that they do personally benefit us. Like, don't get me wrong, we should be volunteering in spaces that do personally benefit us, because if we do this, it's going to benefit me, but it's going to benefit us all, and therefore I'm participating, and it's a great and wonderful thing, even if we can see the benefit. But what I'm talking about in terms of cultivating gratitude is making sure that we're also doing the things that are outside of that, you know, like where we're not beginning with the intention of how is this benefiting me. But I don't think it's wrong. It's not wrong to experience the benefits of doing these things.
So you think the key is initial motivation for the act, it being selfless?
It's tough to separate. But I don't think our only motivation should be, I'm doing this because it's Christian duty. I'm doing this because this is a part of my following God. I like, and so you feel as though I'm doing this because this is benefiting my standing before God. That's the wrong reason. But you know, there's definitely still Christian duty, and there definitely is things that we should do because it's the right thing to do. But from a spiritual discipline point, I just think it's good for us to stop each week and think about, you know, where have I given my time this week that has entirely not really been about me and my lifestyle and my and you know that I can somehow put myself aside.
Kind of interesting, because today in my lesson I was having a conversation with my prof, and he was kind of advising the exact opposite. And that to be like an uber successful kind of person in the field, that you kind of need to have a sense of a little bit of kind of selfishness, and just like you do your work, but ideally, but it is redeemed, because once you are in that high spot in the field, you give back by, you know, sharing it with others and giving people the fruits of your status or whatever, which is kind of interesting, because yeah.
Well, music is a good example. You know, you are in a unique position where, you know, music is your calling, it's your vocation, it's the thing that you're pursuing. That can be an easy area where along the way, people take advantage of the fact that it is your calling, and they can see, well, here's a way, Sam, that you can give back to the community. Here's a way that you can do these different things. And so people will always be asking you. There's a balance to be struck. At some point in time, you're also a professional, or you're a person who's in that career, and you can't just, you know, the community can't just expect, oh, well, you know, this is a part of your gifting, therefore you should give it away all the time. There's an aspect in which you have to guard your time wisely, and you have to consider where you're giving of your gifts. So it's okay to say no. It's okay to be very discerning and think about where you're going to do that. But someone like yourself, at times, it's worthy of saying, where am I giving in my life that has nothing to do with music? Because that way I'm not focusing it just on my career and vocation, my calling. I'm getting outside of it. It's like taking a bit of time every week to fast from that part of your life, to say, this is not only who I am.
Mhm.
Any last word? Otherwise, we're well over time at this point. All right, if you want to talk more about these things, you can always just reach out. I'm happy to talk about any aspect of spiritual disciplines and thinking about the habits that we're trying to cultivate. So I do think these things are important to developing a relationship with God, but I also am putting more emphasis in these things because I think from a mental health standpoint, that leaning into spiritual disciplines is also very good for the whole being of who God calls us to be. So, thanks everybody for your time tonight. I hope you all have a good evening.